I think one of the aspects of retirement planning that doesn't get quite as much attention as it deserves is longevity risk. There's not really enough thought put into or analysis put into, how long is somebody likely to live for. Life expectancy these days for a 65-year-old is 84 for males and 87 for females. If you've got a self-managed super fund, it's actually another 3 years higher than that. If you think about medical advances, those life expectancies have increased pretty significantly in the last 20, 30, 40 years. Advances these days are going to see those go a lot higher as well. In the US, there's a guy called Peter Diamandis who has a project called Human Longevity. He's been named by Forbes as one of the world's greatest leaders. And the stated aim of this Human Longevity project is to extend the quality of and length of people's lives. And one of his lines is that he wants to make 100 the new 60. So I think a lot of thought really needs to go into planning for an analysis around how long people are going to live. One of the aspects that ties into that is your projection of returns. So what is the investment of your retirement assets likely to generate in terms of per annum returns? Now recently I actually saw some projections that were using an annualized return rate of 14.5%. Now I think you can really make anything look good on a 14.5% return. And if you're going to suggest to somebody that they're likely to get a 14.5% return through their retirement years, it's a bit reckless in my book, and it's a bit risky because the likelihood of actually achieving that on a year-on-year basis is very, very low. Vanguard, in their capital pricing model, put out a 10-year forecast based on analysis that they do. They're forecasting for the next 10 years that Australian equities and global equities are likely to return somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 10% per annum, and less for fixed income. So a 60-40 model based on equities and bonds is probably going to give something more in the vicinity of 6 to 8% per annum. So we really need to make sure that those forecasts around retirement projections are a lot more conservative than I think what historical returns have been, particularly around some of those equities, particularly given some of the volatility that we've seen, not just in recent times, but in recent years as well. So the two things tie in pretty closely in terms of longevity risk. How long are people going to live for? And what are your forecasts in terms of your returns? Because those two things are so closely linked. The other aspect is you've got to consider volatility. Most forecasts use a flat return of, say, 8% per annum. Now, we know in reality that just doesn't occur. 1 year you get a good return, the next year it's not so good. There's that volatility that you get there. So it's important to make sure that analysis looks at different scenarios, that looks at different return possibilities, good years and bad, looks at what's known as sequencing risk in terms of what if you get those negative returns in the lead up to retirement, in those first couple of years of retirement. That has a bigger impact. If you're starting to draw down on your retirement assets and at the same time you're getting negative returns, has a much bigger impact than in the times when you're still in that growth phase and you're not drawing down on assets yet. So retirement planning really needs to, I think, have a much more in-depth analysis around these issues. I think it's going to be something that we see a lot more of. If it's not happening at the moment, if you're not feeling comfortable with the amount of work that's been put into that, some of those questions I think you should be asking of your planner or of your advisor, and really making sure that you're feeling comfortable with how those things look.